everybody, it's Lacey.
And I'm Lauren.
And welcome to another episode of the Lawmas Podcast.
And today we're going to be continuing with our infamous women. And today we're going to be talking about serial killer Aileen Wuornos. And when Lacey mentioned this, wasn't sure who she was. But after Googling, I realized I did know who she is because of the movie Monster that had Charlize Theron in it. And this is who she played. So if that gives you a refresher for anybody like it did me, this is who we will be talking about today.
Yep. And before we get there, Lauren, I do have a question. So I know we've talked about power of attorneys recently and getting those done, but when should somebody get a will done? Because clearly it changes. Like if you ever want to change it, you have to spend more money potentially to hire an attorney to get it done again. Is there a rule of thumb that you like to go by for when to do a will?
I think there's a few different times we think about it. Like, if you own real estate, I think that's always a good time to go ahead and get that will done. When you have children, I think that's definitely a good time because we want to make sure we put guardians for the children. And then we may not need to update it till the children are adults. So usually doing that one, or then, when you do have adult children. But the big thing about doing a will is you want to do it while you're mentally competent to do so. And lately I've been approached a lot by people who are in situations like maybe hospice or they're dying sooner rather than later. And that's a hard situation for me because, yes, I want to help these people. But the question is, do they still have capacity to do so in this situation? So the bar for capacity with the will is pretty low. You just got to know who you want to have your stuff, what you have and who you want to give it to. But when you're on hospice and you're like being pumped full of morphine, mentally you're not competent to sign a will, I don't think, because you're so, drugged out. Or if you have been, the doctor told you, you only have a day or two to live, are you in the right mental state to make these decisions? So I think a lot of times people will put this off and then realize, hey, I need this when something bad happens. Now, I'm not saying like if you've been diagnosed with cancer and they say it's terminal, you definitely probably still have time to do a will. You still have capacity to do so. But like when you wait to that end of life stages, I know me and a lot of other attorneys that do this type work are going to question if you have the capacity to do so. And it's just a situation you don't want to put your family in. So I think, the sooner the better. And realistically, don't wait. Don't wait till you're 90 years old and you've been told you have like 3 months to live and they're pumping you full of medicine. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have that medicine. You should to be comfortable, but it's messing with your mental state. And none of us want to get in trouble for malpractice or doing wills that we don't feel secure in doing. I'm not going to do a will for somebody I don't think is competent. And so I just think like if you wait too late, there's a good chance you're not going to be able to get it done. And even if you do have to update it in the future, just know that that's, one of those things that occasionally will come up, but we're not going to be updating it every year. It's more when big life changes happen. But don't wait until your family member has been on death's door to come do the will. That's my little PSA for everybody in estate planning. Do it the sooner rather than later because none of us are guaranteed not to walk out this door today and be hit by a bus.
Solid point. So quick question to segue into Aileen Wuornos. Before we get into her, she had one child when she died and she was executed. She died on death row. She had one child that was given up for adoption. If she had no other surviving relatives, would that adopted child be able to inherit? She had nothing. She was on death row, but that's
I was going to say, I really don't think she'd have. So it depends on the situation, but sometimes, like usually when a person gets adopted, it like cuts all those rights from the parent. But there are some exceptions to that. And there's more exceptions like for the child to be able to inherit from the parent than from, for instance, like if you gave your child up for adoption and then your child became a millionaire and died, you are
Got
not going to be able to go back and get. You gave your child up for adoption. But there
right.
are some exceptions, like in this situation where if she had assets, there could be a chance that the birth child could be able to inherit from his mom in that situation.
Mhm.
But we're never going to see it in the reverse.
So moving on from that, so like I said, talking about Aileen Wuornos here, and you probably shouldn't have like favorite serial killer. I mean, I want to say like it's a, I guess the story fascinates me, especially as an attorney. Some of the moving parts I'm going to get into with her sentencing and how she was sentenced to death. But going to Aileen Wuornos, so she is a notorious serial killer, and I think what makes her so notorious is kind of like what we were talking about last week, Lauren. Just her being a female. When we think of serial killers, we typically think of men. Like most people, most serial killers that we know that have been, convicted of multiple murders have been men. So I think one of the reasons she is so famous, I guess you would say, is because she is a female for killing multiple men. So Aileen was born. Her mom was like 14 years old when she married her dad, and she had an older brother. And she, like 2 years after her brother was born, she was born. But by that point, her mom had filed for divorce from her dad. So Aileen never met her dad, and her dad was actually later convicted of rape, and I think it was a minor as well. So he was sentenced like life in prison, and he died by suicide in prison. So she never met him. And then her mom was like, I'm not raising these kids anymore. And so she left the kids at grandparents and was like, they're y'all's now. And the grandparents adopted her and her brother, which she didn't find out that they were adopted until later on in life. But she did just live just a very hard life. She has said that her grandfather abused her and would make her take her clothes off and was very terrible towards her. Her grandma later died, and her grandpa kicked her out when she was like 12, 13, 14 years old. And so that's when she started her career in sex work. And that is what led to these murders, is her career in sex work. So that's what she used to support herself once she was kicked out at a very young age. She was already starting to dabble in it at like 12 years old, which is just insanity to me, but for drugs and a bunch of other stuff. And one thing to note too, her dad was apparently diagnosed with schizophrenia and maybe a couple other mental health disorders. And so, like, when I talk about Aileen in these situations, I very much think she had mental illnesses as well, similar to his. But she continued life as a sex worker, and she went on with that, and she was in and out. She eventually ended up in Florida, which is where these crimes were committed. She murdered like 6 or 7 men, but she had been in trouble a lot before then. And I'm not talking about just maybe shoplifting here and there. I'm talking, I think she chunked like a cue ball from playing, oh God, I'm blanking. Pool, yeah. She chunked one of that at somebody's head. And so lots of physical violence she had been arrested for, convicted for, as well as like robbery. She had been in trouble with guns before. I mean, when she killed these men, it's not like we're going in with a clean record. I have to say that. She was, she had quite the history of violent acts. And I do believe she would have continued to be violent and probably murder if she had not been caught. So what I find the most fascinating in this case is how she arrived to the death sentence with the first victim. So the first victim, She ended up killing him, and all six, she said that they tried to rape her. That was her initial story when she got caught. And the way she got caught is like she had fingerprints all in these men's cars. Like I said, she was involved in sex work. She said these men picked her up as a sex worker, and she had a girlfriend at the time, and the girlfriend got a confession for immunity. So the girlfriend was they reached out to her. She had fled away from Aileen and was like, hey, we will give you immunity, meaning she would not be prosecuted if you help us get this confession. So they were able to elicit a confession from Aileen using the girlfriend, and so that's why she was arrested for the 6 murders. But the first one, she says he was trying to rape her, and she details that very horribly. I won't go into details on the podcast, but it's very, very bad. And so that was the first case she went to trial on. This man actually had already been convicted of prior rape, and they had information about him being very harmful to women and violent to women, but none of that came in to the jury when determining whether or not Aileen should get the death sentence or not. Now, she did get the death penalty on the others, and I think she pled no contest on some. So maybe she still would have ended up on death row, but I think it more so stemmed from the first case, which I do think was true. So I think, in my opinion, what I think happened is I do think this first man tried to rape her, and that triggered her trauma. And like I said, I do think she was mentally unwell. She was diagnosed as antisocial personality, which is a very hard diagnosis. But I think that just triggered her, and that's what led to the killing of the other men. I'm not convinced. And she later teetered back and forth on the other 5 men about them trying to rape her and harm her. And, then she subsequently she shot all of them to death. So I don't know. I think the first one just triggered the trauma. I think he did try to rape her. And if that hadn't happened, I don't know that she would have went on the killing spree. I think that's what triggered her. But I do believe the information about his past should have come in at least during the sentencing phase. What are your thoughts on that, Lauren?
Well, I guess I have a question. So, like, since she confessed and they have a confession from her, was there a trial, or was there a guilt or innocence phase since she confessed? Was there a regular trial?
Yeah, so the first one was. The others she pled no contest to. So with the first one, there was a trial, and that was the one I think she continuously kept the same story, that he did rape her, and it was in self-defense that she shot him. Initially, it was all of them, but then she kind of backtracked and teetered. She kind of backtracked and teetered on all of them at some points when she was actually on death row, because I think she even made statements that she just wanted to die and for her lawyers to quit fighting for her to get off death row. And she would say, I'm a horrible human being, just kill me. But for the most part, and during the trial, she did say that it was in self-defense for the first one, and that was a trial, and then the death
okay, so because even though she confessed, because she's saying it's self-defense, she
did say that in the confession. She did say, now in the confession, she said all of them. They all tried to rape her, and it was all self-defense. That's what the confession was.
Okay. I mean, I would think his priors probably should have came in to show he did have a habit. And just so people know, like, when stuff comes in, like, the judge makes this decision based on if it is more probative than prejudicial. So it is in a judge's discretion on certain things coming in, and a judge has to weigh those factors. So it's not that her attorneys didn't try to put that out there. It's the fact the judge said, no, the jury doesn't need to hear this because this is more prejudicial than probative. Yeah. But in this situation, I think it's probative. It has value because it shows a track record of him to back up what she is saying. Yeah. Now, in the long run, would it have made a difference? I don't know, because she killed 6 other people. So, I mean...
Right. I can't say that she would have eventually got the death penalty for one of the others, But it does just bother me that the first one, before she pled to the other ones, she got the death penalty. And even if you're not going to allow that to come in for the jury to consider for the trial, right? Whether she's guilty or not guilty, I think it has to come in the penalty phase. I think the jury has to hear his prior convictions, and any letters from others about how he was, at least during the penalty phase.
Question: was she tried for? Okay, so the timeline on this. I guess I'm just thinking, why did they go after the death penalty just for one death, or had she already killed all 6 of them at that point?
She had already killed all 6, but this was just the first one they brought to trial. So after that, she pled to some of the others, not all. There is one that I believe she confessed to killing, but they never found his body, so she was not convicted of one. But
Okay, so that's why they went after the death penalty on the on one. That it's not that they went after the death penalty for her killing one man. They had the other 5 or 6 or however many lined up to go. Okay,
and I think her history played a part in it too, which I do understand. I mean, like I said in the beginning, this is not a woman with a clean record. She was not coming in, never been in trouble before in her life, and then just went on a spree. I mean, she had some pretty brutal, violent convictions, and some involving firearms, and all these men were shot to death multiple times. So, I think that played a part in it as well, with the fact that there were 6 men that were murdered. So that, I think all of that went in together as to why they sought the death penalty. And I think because of her diagnosis, and that, from what I have been told, like if you are diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, that is just one thing you don't want, because you can't, there's a lot of things that you can, like psychiatrists and psychologists can help people with and get treatment plans with, and I guess rehabilitate. And that is one I've always heard that either you can't, or it's just the hardest to do. So she definitely never needed to get out of prison. I don't think she should have gotten the death penalty, but she definitely should have got. I mean, you could not let this person out of prison for sure. She was going to continue to harm people. She was very, very unwell, on top of so much trauma from her childhood and what she had endured. I just don't think there was a place where you could let her out into a community and not worry that she's not going to do something, because she most likely would have.
Well, I'm looking at, I just wanted to pull up some stats while we're talking about women being executed and those type things. So in total, this is from the 1600s when they started, I guess, formally having trials and executing people here. 576 documented instances as of December 31st, 2022, of women actually being, and that is beginning with 1632. So only 576 women. And since they reinstated it, there was a time period when the death penalty went off the table everywhere, and then it came back. And so since 1976, 18 women, and one person on here, just as a note, one was a man who transitioned to a woman. So there's different ways of how they classify that. But including that person, there's 18 women who have been executed, and they all have been in the South, obviously. But
really?
One
they're also it's all in southern state. Well, that would make sense. We do. We haven't abolished the death penalty.
Missouri, so that's kind of it's Midwestern, but none in South Carolina actually. No women have been executed here. But I just thought it was interesting how small it's 3.6% of people that have been executed have been women.
And I think she was, so it's cruel and unusual punishment is the 8th Amendment, and so they deemed for a while that the death penalty was cruel and unusual punishment, but in 1976, that's when that was overturned, and she was the 10th woman, I think, once it was reinstated, to be executed, because she was, I think it was the early 2000s.
Yeah, she was
And
executed in 2002.
um, so I have two things. One thing to add, and then I have a question. So one thing, when I listen to my true crime podcast, I find it interesting what people choose as their last meal. She declined her last meal. She only wanted a black cup of coffee, and she said that she will be back. So interesting fact there. But my question is: so we reserve the right for the death. Well, the death penalty is supposed to be for the most heinous crimes, right? And let's just say, for the sake of argument for this, we both believe in death penalty wholeheartedly and fully, right? And so the heinous of crimes, I always like to compare, because I think a lot of times I see things and it doesn't make sense why it's the death penalty, because it's not as heinous as other things that didn't. So what does this compare in your mind to Susan Smith? Because on one hand, Susan Smith had no record, but killed two innocent children, whereas here, yes, you have 6 deaths, but a very disturbed, a very sexually abused trauma that you also have in the Susan Smith case too. So you do have that in this case as well. But Aileen had multiple convictions with guns and violence, but she was working as a sex worker. These men were all older than her. She was like in her early 30s. They were all 40 to 60 years old. And now you have this information where the first one potentially raped her and had in the past. How do you gauge this? Do you say, you know what, death penalty is appropriate for Aileen, but not Susan? Or do you say Susan Smith was more heinous and she should have gotten it and Aileen not?
I think that's a hard one. I think for one, with Aileen, it was they were doing some bad stuff. The men that were coming to her were not on the up and up. You're not gonna go. I mean, I try to
We're
be.
comparing victims to Susan Smith. They're very
Yes,
different categories.
innocent.
I agree. Those were two very innocent babies. This is completely different. I agree.
And as a mom, the mom part of me is like, how could you ever do that to your children? Like, to me, Susan Smith's crime was more heart wrenching because it was two little babies that she was the one that was their mom, that was their support system, that was who they went to for stuff. Where in this situation, you were going to a prostitute to have sex, which was illegal in Florida at the time. So these men were engaging in illegal behaviors themselves. They were all adult consenting men knowing what they were going into. Now, did they deserve to get killed if they didn't rape
No.
her? No, I don't think so. I don't think prostitution should merit, if you do that, to be shot like they were. I
Right.
think some of it is the nature of her crime, though, brutally shooting that many people. I think the thought is, yes, on the first one, but I guess probably, I'm guessing back in 2002, everybody had heard about, or when she had her trial, everybody had heard about her and knew she'd killed all these other people. So there's the thought she can't be rehabilitated at all. And then if you let her out, she's just a danger to society kind of situation, where I guess in Susan Smith, I don't know if she was truly a danger to society as much. Would she go out and
True.
kill random people? No,
True.
she killed her sons because she wanted a man. And now who's to say she wouldn't be deranged and kill some woman for trying to take her man too? I don't know. But in her situation, I guess the public at large wasn't as much of a threat as in this situation with Aileen. I mean,
Yeah,
it
she
was
would be a
more.
threat, especially with her diagnosis. I do think that she would have continued to be a threat. Like I said, I don't think she should have got the death penalty, but definitely life in prison. She was not someone that you could trust to be in the community and us be safe. But you bring up if Susan Smith were released today, I don't know that she would hurt again. I'm definitely more confident that if Aileen were still with us, she would. I don't have that confidence
I
level
don't
with
think
Susan.
Susan Smith is going to go out and randomly murder somebody, I guess,
Right.
just for, I don't know. Okay, so this can be a whole nother podcast episode where we dig more into serial killers and the serial killer gene, if it's a thing or
Yeah.
not a thing.
Yeah.
I don't think Susan Smith had that.
No,
I do
I agree.
not think she is the type. What she did is heartbreaking and disgusting. And if she had got the death penalty, I would say I feel like that was a very heinous crime. But I do not think the way she killed is a threat to society at large. With this Aileen Wuornos, what
Right.
if somebody just pissed her off and she flew off the deep end? It was started out with the men that were using her for prostitution, but it could have easily escalated to you cut me off at Walmart, screw you kind of
Well,
situation.
my question too is hitchhiking was really big in this time of Eileen, and I don't know that every single one of these men were seeking out her services, I guess I should say. Um, I wonder if some of them just picked her up because she was hitchhiking and then she just murdered him in cold blood. Um,
Right.
I think that is quite possible. I don't think the first one. I fully believe her story on the first one. I can't tell you why. I mean, I think I guess because I do know the priors, and so like, and I think that that is just what set her off onto this spree, like I said earlier. But I don't know that all five of them were Johns. I do think there were. It's not out of the realm of possibility that some of them were innocent and just trying to give her a ride because I know hitchhiking was a lot bigger during that time frame when these murders were committed.
Yeah,
So
we didn't
I
have
agree.
cell
Like,
phones. Like you were, if you were stuck on the
yeah,
side of the road, you would hope a friendly neighbor would pick you up. So yeah, I think she was more of a threat to society than Susan Smith was. Now
hmm
their level of heinousness,
Susan Smith takes the cake in my book.
but I don't think she's the threat. I think the
I
threat
agree
also
with you. Yeah,
is the
I
threat.
think I think both of us are kind of on the same page. It's more heinous, and this could because we're moms. We think the crime is more heinous that Susan Smith committed, but when you look at the other side of it, threat to the community, then Eileen Wuornos takes the cake. And this
And
is why I say it's so complex with death penalty and who gets it and who doesn't. It, that's
and
just
it
so hard.
a lot of it depends on what state you're in too. Like obviously some
Yeah,
states it's not legal, but say it was legal in all 50 states. Some states are going to be more likely to pursue because when you look at this, the list of the women,
yeah,
Texas, Texas is a big one. Oklahoma's, which is kind of surprising. Oklahoma's the South, but not as much like South, I guess. But
yeah.
Oklahoma's in there, Florida, where I feel certain states are just less likely to, even if it's legal, they are less likely to go for it. So I think a lot of it's going to depend where you are.
I didn't think about that, but you're right. And I also think in building off that, um, Union, where Susan Smith did not get the death penalty, they sought it and did not get it, is a tight knit community. And these jurors were supposed to not know the case and go in open minded. And I'm not saying that they didn't. I do, but I do think there's a difference when it is a smaller community. Not saying that they knew her or knew stuff, but it is a different mindset. Whereas where Eileen was sentenced to the death penalty with these jurors, it's Florida, it's a bigger city, it's more disconnect from your community, if that makes sense. So I think what you're
And
saying
she
is
wasn't
whether,
from
especially
there.
from a woman, I think it's different for men, but when you're talking about sending a woman to death row, I think, like you said, place plays a part. I think it probably is harder for a smaller, tight knit community for those jurors to send a woman to death row as opposed to like Florida, a bigger city, a wider county that just doesn't have that tight knit
Well,
feel.
and she was from Michigan, so she wasn't born and raised there. She didn't have connections. Like in Union County, Susan Smith, born, raised, her whole family
Yeah,
was there. And whether the jurors knew her, you knew somebody that knew her. Like,
yeah,
even if you had no opinion and the jurors were, you knew it's like the 6 degrees of like Kevin Bacon thing. In Union, we probably all know each other, but less than 3 degrees kind of thing because it is a small community. And like, for instance, my mom knew her. Angie, that's my admin downstairs, she went to school with her.
hmm
And that's like a small section of us all knew her. I do think, and I just think in general, states, the way they perceive and go after death penalties different depending on resources, allocation. Um, but I think I think we need to in the future do a podcast just dealing more, like do a series on serial killers and kind of looking at the difference of how they were treated,
yeah.
punished, and also where they were, and talk about the serial killer gene and if we think it's real or not.
I agree. Somebody mentioned guy was accused of something pretty harsh, and they said, I don't know that he did it. He was very nice and kind of and so charming. And I said, you just described Ted Bundy. So yeah, so I definitely think that and they're like, oh my gosh, you're right. So yeah, so I think that's another thing that we can do. But I think this is kind of wrapping up our Notorious Women in Crime series. But let us know what y'all think. What are y'all thoughts on the death penalty when you take in how heinous a crime is, as well as, harm to the community that they pose if they were to be released, and any other topics y'all want us to talk about? See you later.